Hello everyone and welcome back to the garage, and probably the last video on the Daytona, at least the mechanical side of it. Just when I thought everything's done, I finished the suspension, the brakes, the engine, everything should be good, I noticed one last thing. So it's not immediately obvious, but this is the clutch cover, and everything seems fine, except when you start touching things and you notice this broken spring. So the spring itself is fine, it's just a little tab that's supposed to catch on this lug here. It's missing, it's snapped off. So do we actually need that spring? Well, the bike will run fine without it, the clutch will run fine without it. But what that's meant to do is just take the pressure off. As in, you've got your travel here, just make sure the lever is backed off. And what that does is just take contact away from the components. There's no real pressure there, not much anyway. But there will be contact between certain components inside the clutch, and that will cause excessive wear, unnecessary wear. So although the bike will run fine without this, it's a very good idea to replace it, just to minimize wear. So that's what we're going to do. We got a new spring, we got a pin, a seal and a bearing as well, just in case. Well, we should replace them because they've probably never been apart, and a new gasket of course. So yeah, let's get started. So here I'm just using a spanner to turn the clutch lever and remove the cable. So now I'm going to start and break loose all the bolts to hold the cover on, and although I'm very tempted to just use an impact gun, I'm going to break them loose by hand. Because this cover probably hasn't been off the bike in a long time, and I don't know the history of this bike, I don't want to snap any heads off or ruin threads and ruin my day at the same time. I'm just going to break them loose by hand, nice and easy, so I can feel what's going on. And another thing I'd like to point out, if you listen for that nice click when the bolt breaks loose, to me that's an indication that there's a good thread there. If it's not as positive, or it feels soft, or something doesn't feel quite right, there's a good chance that thread might be damaged. But when I hear that nice click, that gives me some confidence that there's a good thread there. Anyway, let's move on. Now this cover has a couple of tabs on either side that you can use to pry against. And here she comes. I'm kind of excited to see what's inside. And look at that, 20-year-old bike, around 50,000 miles on the clock, and everything looks pretty nice in here. It's all clean and in good shape. So here's the cover in a soft vise on my workbench, and I can take the shaft out. There's a washer on top as well. Probably that gives the spring something to sit on. And I'm just going to use a paper towel to protect the paint a bit, and I'm going to pop that seal out. And here it comes, nice and easy. And there's the bearing. It actually doesn't look too bad, but there is a bit of grit into it, so probably the seal wasn't doing its job anymore. And here I'm using a special bearing driver to drive that one out. And there it goes. And here's one bearing out. It's not too bad looking, is it? So the way this works is, you see we've got this cutout with a slot in it in the shaft, and that edge where it's shinier, that's the actual contact area between this and the stud. And you can see it's slightly worn, but it's not too bad, to be honest, after all these miles. So this just sits somewhere like there, and as you pull the clutch in, it just twists like that. I can't move the stud by hand, but you can see how the shaft moves in and out as I turn it. So what would happen if I wouldn't replace that spring? Well, this could always stay like this, engaged, these two faces rubbing, or this bearing keep spinning constantly, which it will increase the wear. So it's a good idea to replace it, make sure everything stays nice and clean, nice and tidy. So I've got all my parts clean and ready to go back together. This has to be one of the most stubborn gaskets I ever had the pleasure of taking off. I had to use a brass wire brush in the end just to clean everything up. But it turned out alright, no damages to the surface, it's all good. Ready to go back in place with a new gasket. So yeah, let's start putting it back together. So I'm going to start with the new bearing. Just spray some oil on it to make it easier to install. Line it up with the bore, and I'm going to use a socket to drive it in till it's flush with the bottom of the counter bore. And there it is, that bit's done. Ready to put in the new seal. And I'm going to use the same method, just lubricate the seal so it slides in easier, and use a bigger socket this time to drive it in till it hits the bottom of the counter bore. And don't forget about the steel washer. And now for the new spring, the reason we're here in the first place. Make sure the spring is the right way around, add some oil to the shaft as well, and gently slide it in. I'm gonna be careful though not to damage that seal. And there we go, seems to work lovely. Now what I forgot to mention is that there's another roller bearing right in there. And I didn't replace that for 3 reasons. One of them, the first one, is I didn't know it's actually there. I looked at the Triumph diagram when I ordered the parts, but it wasn't obvious to me there's another bearing in there. However, thinking about it now, it makes sense there would be. Second reason, looking at it now, it's fine. It works, it's not worn. This does the main job actually. This takes the real beating, but the other one's more exposed if that seal fails, which it wasn't great in our case. That bearing will get chewed up. And the third reason is, looking at it, it's like a real pain to get it out. If you look from above, if I pull the shaft out a bit, there isn't much of an edge left under it to pull against, and I can't knock it through. There's nowhere for it to go. So taking that bearing out might be a real pain. But yeah, everything else works fine. It seems good. So yeah, let's carry on and put it back together. So I've removed this insulation pad just to make sure there's none of the old gasket material stuck underneath it, so I can give everything a proper clean. So I'm just going to put this back and bolt it in place. So now I'm putting the new gasket on. They should be fine if you install them dry, but I have put a very thin layer of grease on the mating surfaces of both the crankcase and the cover, and that should soften up the gasket a bit and help it bed in and give a better seal, and also make it easier to remove in the future. The grease also helps it stay in place and make it easier to install. And here comes the cover back on. Just make sure the clutch lever mechanism engages properly. And I'm just going to drive a couple of bolts in to make sure it stays in place. And now I can drive the rest of them in. And tighten them to the correct torque. Now the manual doesn't specify any pattern, but I'm just going to start in the center and work my way towards the ends. Just giving it one more pass to double check I've got all of them. And it all seems to work as it should. I'm just going to reattach the cable now, and we're done. And that's it. The last mechanical job on this bike is done. It should be all technically sound. It just needs some bodywork strapped on it and ready for some fun. I'm not sure we're going to have any more videos on the Daytona. We may get something on the bodywork later on, but not sure at this point. So I hope you enjoyed this series. Hope it was helpful for you, and see you in the next videos. Thanks for watching.